Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Qualley, and we're going to dive into a great topic today. We're going to talk about body image and we're going to talk about HAES. And we have a wonderful guest to talk about it. Just so you know, HAES is healthy at every size. And this is a very important topic. And so I have a wonderful coach, Shaquelle Hibbert, and she is going to talk about this with her own experience with it and how she is a big supporter of it. And she utilizes a lot of these strategies and languages around body image with her clients. Me and Shaquelle kind of come from very different perspectives. I'm someone who's going after lean physique. I use calorie counting, tracking. My objective goals are actually using weight and I'm going for the aesthetics. But I don't necessarily believe that that is the only path. I don't believe that is inherently the true destiny of health. As a matter of fact, I do believe that you can be healthy at many sizes. And we're going to explore this, but I also explore how I don't agree that it's healthy at every size. We're going to dive into this topic. We're going to also dive into her story. She came from a really tough background of having to lose a lot of weight. She came from being pre-diabetic and how that really started her on her own journey. So I don't want to spoil any more from her story. So here is Shaquille Hibbert. Good day, Shaq. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm absolutely terrific. So we got to dive into this. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So Shaquelle, you did the Mavericks with me, and we just reached out, had a good chat, and you've been on the podcast before, but I don't really like to do the pre-introductions. I love people to tell their own story. And I'm going to make sure we dig right into this. I know we did it a little bit on the last one, but I want to know all about Shaquelle today. So why don't you tell the audience about yourself and literally where you grew up? Let's go down to grassroots.
Okay. So I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And I was born and raised there, lived there my whole life. I lived over in the Maples area for people, listeners that are over in Manitoba, and then moved over to North Kildonan for my older years. And just recently I moved out to Toronto, Ontario. So I'm now living out here and I love it.
I love that. And the Maples area is everyone has their area in Winnipeg, right? But okay, let's like expand on that. I want to know more about growing up as Shaq. Like, what were the good things, the tough things, what defined you? And also tell, the listeners, what is your expertise and how it grew you into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I, again, grew up in the Maples area. I was very much into art and music. I used to be a part of every single jazz band possible in my days. I was also in choir. In middle school, I used to solo, like singing in jazz choir. And then in high school, I went more into playing different instruments and soloing on those. So saxophone was my thing. I played tenor sax, bari sax, alto sax. I soloed mostly on baritone saxophone. And I actually got told at one of my performances that I should go into music school by one of the professors at Brandon University. So I was really deep in it. Oh, and there's an alarm for who knows what. So I was very deep into music, and I really did consider it as a career choice, but there was a part of me that loved health and wellness. So I actually considered music therapy for a while. But what kind of got me into the health and wellness space is really being surrounded by chronic illness, specifically type 2 diabetes in my family. Every grandparent I had type 2 diabetes, and I kind of was one of their helpers. So I kind of saw the condition progress and it go into their other, or problems start to arrive in their other organs and the other complications that sort of started to come up, and then was diagnosed at 18 with prediabetes. So that's how I got into my profession here.
Wow, yeah, no, that definitely pulls you into it. Really fascinating to know you had those alternative paths. I was similar with carpentry. I actually thought I was going to be a carpenter, but you get this personalized pull, right? And that was what I recognized was I was doing this stuff in my spare time. Like this was not something I had to do. I was just so obsessed with it, and then that makes you feel like if I could get paid to be a part of this in other people's lives, how could I ever live, unfulfilled, right? That's kind of how it occurred to me. So you get into when did you actually make that transition? Like when were you like, okay, I'm going to get into kinesiology. I'm going to do the best I can, and then continue to tell me about your own challenges with getting out of being pre-diabetic.
Absolutely. So I would say, so in high school, they make you kind of prepare for university. And I knew there's a part of me that liked some type of sciences, although I was very much into music. So I wanted to keep my options open. So I kind of prepared for it in my older years in around grade 11 and 12, but I didn't know kinesiology existed yet. And then I heard about athletic therapy at the University of Winnipeg, and I was very interested in that. I'm like, okay, that kind of sounds like what I want to do. So I applied, got in, and went into U of W, did my first year. And I love the kinesiology courses. But after talking to an academic advisor, it didn't sound like the profession aligned with what I was looking for, because I wanted to work with chronic illness. And how they had explained it to me was, as an athletic therapist, I would be working with teams. They didn't explain the whole other world that can come with anything related to kinesiology, really. So I just decided to do a general kinesiology degree. Ended up moving to University of Manitoba, still pursuing general kinesiology. And of course, around that time, I was personally trying to lose weight and gain some control over my blood sugar. So at the time, I was very much into more of the traditional diet culture things. So trying all the different diets and, running on a treadmill. I did not touch weights. I was scared of them. And I mean, growing up in the 90s, it was not very common for women to be on that side of the gym. So I steered away from lifting weights for a very long time just because of the representation out there. And after going on many different diets, I eventually lost 50, 60, 70 pounds over time. And I kept it off for quite a few years. And I did switch the types of diets and types of nutrition habits I was doing, and I'm sure we'll dive into that later on as we talk about HAES and things like that. Right now, I've recently entered more intuitive eating, and that's where I'm at now. And I would say, out of all those years trying to find balance with my blood sugars and everything, that this has been the most balance I felt in my body and with my relationship with food and exercise. Whereas before, I was very much restricting and feeling guilty and binge eating. And I was kind of in that cycle for many years. So that's my story there.
Well, it's quite a story. And I mean, congratulations on making that big of a leap, like losing 70, 80 pounds like that. I never had that much of a fat loss. Like I was a little bit chubbier as a kid. And so having this big traumatic shift in your life you're changing your character. And like you had said, keeping it off. And I like how you put that in there because that is a big part of it. I've seen and heard of people losing that, but then gaining that back. And that is even worse the second time round because you've been there, right? And so, you had kind of alluded to some of these different tactics and stuff. What I'm really curious about what were some aha moments? Because I've had many throughout the years, and even though you go through diets and some are good, but there's definitely always bad to them. That's why you don't keep them up. But there was usually, I always say, like, I don't blame people for doing diets and trying different things because they're trying, and you pick up a little bit of a lesson from each along the way. So what were some real, like, good lessons for you that maybe you still apply or worked for you at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start with where I started with dieting. So well, my first successful set of dieting, I should say, because there was the teen years and that was a whole situation in itself. I started with cutting out chips and pop completely. And I think I started walking at that time as for physical activity. And I had lost 20 pounds with that. I don't know what the time frame was. I wasn't really tracking it in that way. But I had lost 20 pounds just from cutting out those two foods and drinks. And I'd say the biggest thing I learned while doing that type of restriction was I was eating way more than I thought. Because I had tried to calorie count previous to that, but it was very inaccurate. And that's why I had never had success. So after my cutting out of chips and pop, that's when I got more into calorie counting and started to be real honest. And I used measuring cups. And I actually started to measure out how much I was eating and how much, at the time, the Canada's Food Guide was saying was good. And it was quite different from what I was tracking before by just trying to eyeball it. And so I calorie counted for, I would say, most of my adult life for years. And I did it consistently every single day. I got to a point where I was pre-entering my meals for the day. So I just knew how much I was eating. And that I would say accounted for a drastic amount of my weight loss. When I got into those larger numbers, the 50, 60 pounds of weight loss is when I was doing calorie counting. Along the way, though, I did have multiple almost breakdowns. I remember distinctly one Christmas, I had cried to my boyfriend at the time saying, I just want to enjoy Christmas dinner. I don't want to have to calorie count everything all of the time. And that's when I essentially started to look for another way to continue to either lose weight or maintain what I had lost, because I was so scared to let go of calorie counting, because that was the tool I used for so many years. And I think that was kind of the aha moment there for me, where I was like, okay, if I want to sustain my health and sustain this weight loss I worked so hard for over the years, I need to find something else that's more sustainable for me, because I don't plan on getting to my 30s and 40s and still counting calories like this. I had the time when I was in university, not as I get into my more working years and hopefully building a family and things like that. So that was my aha moment to start intuitive eating. It took years for me to fully get into it, and like the whole premise of health of it at every size, that took a few years for me to digest and understand. But I think, again, it's the best route I've went just for longevity and keeping my health. So that's where we're at today.
Yeah, really good. I want to just really start with that first one that so many people need to learn from, that you cut out chips and you walked. Like, you want to talk about a minimum effective dose, like lowering your barrier to entry. Like, it's just like, just recognize what, if you have something that maybe has too much of a crave to you, too much of a pull, just don't eat that for a bit, just for a bit. It's not forever. And go for a walk just to be more active. And it's such a low barrier to entry that people don't think it's real. And so they don't do anything. But you were able to get 20 pounds of weight loss from that. And, I just think that's incredible. And I hope people really get that message. But, it's interesting how basically what a person has to do is determine a different form of restriction, right? Because and it sounds scary when you use the word restriction, but really a road is restrictive because it sends you on a path, right? It has ditches. We go this way if you want to go this way. So if you're trying to, lose body fat, you have to be in a caloric restriction. And what way you do that has to be the tools that you want to use. This is why there's a million different diets out there, right? So calorie counting can work to a degree, but then you felt this emotional pull, but also like a guilt, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so because of this guilt, and you had said, like, I just want to enjoy Christmas dinner. Like, absolutely, you should be able to. And I think this is probably where, calorie counting, there has to be a spectrum of uses for it. But I totally also encourage people to recognize, as my clients are using it, and I say, like, making sure that you're using calorie counting as an education piece, as you're doing it. Basically what you had already said before was, oh, I didn't know how much I was eating. Well, when you actually track for a little bit, you can start to wise up that, hey, that was actually a lot of food. And then you also start to realize, oh, this doesn't have a lot of calories and this leaves me quite satiated. So it educates you. And so I think that's why I love your evolvement from, just as simple as popping chips. Let's hold back a little bit, and then trying to do a little bit of calorie tracking to be honest with yourself, and then evolving it to more of this long term. Okay, what am I going to use day to day? And I think that's kind of roughly how you went about it. And is that, are any of these tactics what you currently use with clients, or do you kind of put them right into more the intuitive eating approach?
Yeah, I use more of the intuitive eating approach. I do touch on calorie counting if, it's someone that is really unsure or scared of intuitive eating, which it is scary to think I'm going to trust my body after years of not trusting what you put into it. So again, if anything, I would use calorie counting as just a tool for very, very short term. But most of my coaching is based off of the intuitive eating principles and learning essentially your own fullness cues, hunger cues, and satisfaction cues, and unlearning the kind of diet tidbits that we've ingrained. So that's kind of what my coaching and all of my courses is about.
Well, this is actually super, super helpful, because this is even something that I'm pulling into mine, especially more going onto the rabbit hole of understanding emotions and how it really does throw people off. And calorie counting can only take you so far, but when you have a craving, when you eat something and it's not satisfying, like this might fit your meal plan. Well, you might feel like, well, this should feel really full because I had 800 calories, but I'm not. Well, if you start paying attention to these foods, paying attention to the body, you're going to feel different. And so I love how you say this. Can you go through, what are the three things again? It was fullness, and what else was it?
Hunger and satisfaction.
Right. And so I love that. Satisfaction is a very important thing. Hunger and satisfaction, because I have another gal that was on here, Alicia Castaneda, and she had said there's two different satieties. There's physical satiety, and then there is mental satiety. Like, maybe you're full, but you're not actually satisfied as a person. It's like, oh, I didn't get enough of that food. And is it the food or is it you? Mm-hmm. And this really ties into making people really pay attention to their emotions around food, right? So I think this is a real heavy thing. Is that any of the kind of education that you're looking into, or trying to help clients with, is really getting them to understand their emotional relationship with foods as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my modules is definitely diving into the emotions around food. And essentially what I do with them is helping them come to terms with what they're actually feeling and what they're actually searching for, whether it is I'm bored and I actually need to do something, or I'm lonely and I need to find a way to handle that loneliness away from food in a way that actually satisfies me. Because it's easy to say, oh, you're lonely, go take your dog for a walk or whatever it may be. But we need to get to the source of, okay, what will actually satisfy you? And so when I say satisfaction, I don't just mean from the food, but in life in general. So it's much deeper than just the physical eating and all of that.
Totally. In handling emotion is actually something we're getting worse at, right? Because we have instant gratification. We have TV, we have food that instantly gratifies and gives you good feelings, but it doesn't solve the problem. I heard this super well said, great gal to follow, anti-diet dietitian on Instagram. And she says, if food is not the problem, food can't be the solution. And it really makes sense, right? Because let's say you are bored. Okay, you ate, so you had some boredom, but boredom's going to happen again. And so, if that's your only solution for boredom, well, guess what? You're going to have a hard time actually paying attention to having the right nutritional habits. And again, if it is loneliness, well, again, that doesn't actually solve the problem. Maybe you're stressed, and this is a really good one for people to pay attention to. I'm stressed, something's wrong. Let's eat food. Well, that wasn't the problem. The stress
Yeah.
isn't hunger, right? It is an emotional stress, and the problem is still evident after you've eaten food.
Mhm.
So what we want to actually do, and this is just a really helpful lesson, even if someone doesn't emotionally, just dealing with emotions, because we probably have outbursts in other ways, right? Is to sit with it and to be in that emotional state and deal with that discomfort. And, I got to tell you, I've been trying it more and more and more and more. It feels like, hey, I can handle this emotion and your body can process it. And processing emotions is something that, if anything, we want to smother. And so I really, really value that. Have you seen really good success with this so far with helping people through the emotional path?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part. And in all honesty, the people that come to my program at first are kind of like, why are we talking about feelings? I'm here to, change my health. So I don't introduce it until about month 2 out of my 3-month program. So we start with, the things they're looking for, as in different changes you can make healthier choices, becoming more aware of the diet culture things that are ingrained. And then we get into, okay, but you said last night you binge ate, so what were we feeling? And then they see the connection a little bit later on. So that's where I introduce it.
It totally makes sense. And people get really uncomfortable talking about emotions unless some people are cognizant of being emotional eaters. And then sometimes you try to use that identity with them and they're like, oh no, I'm not an emotional eater. It's like, oh really? How many times a day do you snack? 3 or 4, and that's not meals, that's snacking, and snacking is probably not an appetite thing. So that's a big part of it for sure. And so I really love that. I love that evolution of how you build the foundation for them, get them to understand the food. So I know you're a big fan of utilizing Canada's Healthy Food Guide, and you kind of structure a lot of the nutritional concepts around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a way, I do use it a bit, but I more structure the nutritional side of things based on what people eat already, because I find that Canada's food guide is quite westernized and it doesn't account for the types of food, for example, for myself as a Caribbean woman, that I would eat. So I found, instead, by just taking almost an inventory of what my clients are actually eating and then almost comparing it to the Canada's Food Guide as for portions of the types of food, and kind of meeting in the middle there.
I really like that. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I always tell people it's not my diet plan, it's your diet plan, right? And it's your food culture. The biggest difference between writing someone a workout plan and writing someone a food plan is culture, like emotions and culture. We can confine the workout to an hour, maybe a walk here or there, but the food is morning, noon, and night, and it's with your people, and that's where you're going to hit a lot of hiccups. So I really love that approach of intertwining it. And so when you're looking at evolving this, and I'm curious about that. So you talked about the diet culture aspect. And so the diet culture, because this is, one of the huge things that we want to talk about today. What kind of things do you try to educate them on, and what are you really against within the diet culture?
So I try to almost pull out of them, again, it's all about their experience. I try to pull out of them what food rules they've ingrained and exercise rules. So some common ones that come up are, I'm not allowed to eat past 8 p.m. So we discuss, where did that come from? Well, my mom said that, whatever. So unpacking things like that. Another common one would be, I need to make sure I work out the day after a big holiday where you are eating a lot. So Christmas dinner is a good example. Why is that? Because this magazine told me I had to. But why? And we dig a little bit deeper. So essentially with that first step I go into, it's all about their own awareness of diet culture. So I don't want to input any of my own intake of diet culture onto them. I don't want to ingrain any of my ideologies from growing up and what I experienced into them. It's more pulling out what they have.
Again, really, really good approach. It's that's a true counseling approach right there, making it more about the individual. But then let me ask you, what were your experiences with rules and concepts about diet culture that really did form you? Because those were a couple really good ones. I really like the, can't eat late at night, otherwise it turns to fat. I had to eat 6 meals a day, and that was in no way true. And that wasn't that long ago. I only changed that like 3 years ago. So, I mean, oh yeah, because and there was a belief that it would be better protein synthesis. You would get better muscle, and that's been disproven. But yeah, a lot of things like that. But what were some heavy diet culture ones that influenced you that you had to alter?
Mm-hmm. Some heavy ones for me is if I was on any type of weight loss journey, I had to cut out anything that wasn't vegetables, essentially. So I kind of mentioned in my teenage years, I had quite a bit of a struggle when it came to weight loss, and that was a part of it. It was, okay, I'm cutting out everything. And in my house, we had more processed food than fruits and vegetables. So I would cut out everything, and what was left is the lettuce in the fridge, and that's pretty much what I would eat. So that was a big one for me. Another one would be the exercise piece. I had quite a struggle finding a mode of exercise that I could stick with. I framed it as if I wasn't working out like every day a week, then there's no point. And so that kind of steered me off. It was the all or nothing kind of mindset. And that would always steer me off. And that kind of relates to what I mentioned on the food piece, is that I have to be all in and only eating salads and no chocolate covered granola bars or anything like that, or chips. And I had to be doing the Tybo tapes from my mom's collection every day. And that would be very short lived. It'd be one day you do it, and then it's too much, because that wasn't even close to what my lifestyle was like at the time. So I think that was the biggest parts of diet culture for me. And also, sorry, I'd like to mention the fact that I saw dieting as completely separate from my own culture. So my own cultural foods wasn't even an option, because that's not what I saw in the media.
Very, very valuable. I really appreciate the Tybo. Oh man, I did that back in the day when I was in grade 5 or 6. I think it was coming out, and I could never even last the full 45 minutes. We do 10 or 20-minute tapes. We had this 6-day abs tape I would do almost every day. I remember the one time frame where I was able to do every single day one day, the all or nothing. But none of these things stick, and you also just assume that you're doing the abs to get the abs, so there's always that problem. But yeah, it's kind of a hard thing too, because when you look at exercise, that's why I like the walking, like just go walk. If you can experience it, this is actually something, I don't care if you love exercise already, you actually need to develop a habit for walking, because it's always the most sustainable form of exercise that as a human, you can do. And so 10K steps, minimum effective dose for your aerobic capacity. And like when you go into these other forms, this is where it gets tricky, right? Because if you don't like strength yet, you should have it, but that's going to be a hard thing, right? If you don't like a lot of sports, that's going to be a hard thing. So how can you get yourself moving? And then you go into the all or nothing. And then some people tell you the no pain, no gain. And so they tell you, okay, well, no, you're supposed to feel sore. It's a no pain, no gain. Well, that's a dangerous message, actually. It's not really helpful. If anything, I believe always find discomfort that you can sustain. Like that's really what it is. The word discomfort is better than pain, because if you're in pain, you probably did too much. And we're trying to get out of pain. And if you can handle just that right amount, and then that's going to be sustainable for you. So when did you find, because I know for myself, all or nothing, and eventually you kind of do end up falling in love with training through the unnecessary amount of reps. I am an exercise addict at this point. When do you think it happened for you? I actually remember my day. I remember what happened to me. It was breakup and stuff, and so I was training a lot. But for yourself, did you know when you're like, wow, I really do love this?
Yeah, I would say I honestly I had a taste of resistance training when I was very young, and it was a good life that had, what was it called? It was like a teen summer thing they had back in the day. I don't know if they still have it, but they allowed teens in for the summer, and you can have like your little membership. And so I did their intro, and I was introduced to resistance training, like the machines. I'm like, this is so cool. Like I really liked it. Did I stick with it at the time? No, but it kind of stuck with me for a while. And so when I had that, fast forwarding a bit, when I had that pre-diabetes um, scare in my head, cardio was the only way to bring down my blood sugars. And that's kind of what the information out there said as well at the time. So I didn't even think about resistance training. I was just thinking, I need to bring down my blood sugars. So I avoided resistance training for a while. So I would say when I was in university, when I finally allowed myself to step onto the other side of the University of Manitoba gym, the very nice big one they have now, the first thing I did was, I believe it was a lower body day with a friend that worked out quite a bit, and I loved it. I'm like, okay, and I have not resistance trained since then. I consistently have done it at least 3 times a week for the last how many years.
Beautiful. It's just that moment. Like I say, I figured you'd have that moment because there's this bit of almost like an epiphany to you, because it's like you finally have, this discomfort that you enjoy. Like you enjoy it. And it's kind of like, it's similar with like, Whole Foods. Like when you all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I actually like the digestion of a salad and apples, and just like, it's not as appealing initially as like McDonald's or cookies, but the digestion of that is terrible. And so I think that there's this evolution we have to take as people, but when you have that aha moment, it sticks with you. And I think it's beautiful. So one of the other major things we talked about beforehand getting on here was really about what diet culture is evolving to, and you're, really focusing on this body positivity. So how do you help your clients understand the HAES movement? Why don't we go over just the HAES movement first? Okay. So for those who don't know, HAES is healthy at any size, right? That's what it stands for. So I want to hear your depiction of what the HAES movement is about, and how you would define it, and how you think this really helps people.
Yeah, absolutely. So HAES, Health at Every Size, is actually under ASDA, a bunch of different letters. So it's the Association for Size Diversity and Health. And that's kind of the bigger association that came up with HAES. And so I actually have the exact definition of what health is under ASDA. So I'll give that a read and then dive into it. So on their website, their definition of health, it says health exists on a continuum that varies with time and circumstance for each individual, and should not be seen as a resource or capacity available to all, and not as an outcome or objective of living. So my take on that is, well, like they said, health is a continuum, and it varies based on what somebody is going through. And I think a big part of, especially the health at every size, even just the verbiage of that, is health is not determined by what your weight is. It's determined by the healthy habits you are doing and what your blood tests, urine tests come back as in regards to what the healthy numbers are said to be. And I think that's more important than what the scale says. If your body's functioning optimally, that is the definition of health. If you are feeling comfortable in your body, you're balanced, your vitamins are up, that is the definition of health. And that looks very different for every person. I also just want to say, again, with the cultural side of things, is if weight is the way that we are determining somebody's health, we need to take into account what is available to certain people and the cultural norms. Because again, coming from a Caribbean background, the average of our population's weight, especially as Caribbean women, is higher than what, say, a Canadian woman would be. And so comparing our weights in regards to health would be unfair. And so that's my take there.
I love it. I love it. And actually, what I think is that definition, that my favorite part is that what's available is super important, right? Because you have to take into context of what people can do, and culture is very important. So I just, and I am going to debate this a little bit, because I think that the definition, a bit more clarity in there, but I think what I have a problem with it is saying healthy at every size. The word every, and every size, I think, has to have context, because we do have morbidly obese people in this day and age. Now, I will say fully and completely, HAES should stand for happy at any size. Mm-hmm. And I think like a morbidly obese person could honestly be happier than a lean person any single day. But my problem is that it is a hard thing to define. You mentioned there's blood markers, there's things to go on. And this is actually still even hard for us to define, because what is health other than the probability of whether or not you're going to die at a certain time? That's what it is. So if you're going to look at blood markers, if you're going to look at objective measures, outside of that, health is relative. Now, my relative concepts are physical capacity and probably really emotional well-being. And that's going to be on a spectrum, right? Because I believe that there is morbidly obese people, but there's definitely morbidly fit people, and that is not healthy. We know the people who are on stage, the bodybuilders. I almost want to make a diagram of this, because at one point you have a morbidly obese person, you have a morbidly fit person who's a bodybuilder, ton of steroids. They're actually probably around the same lean body mass, right? So a ton of muscle mass, but the one has no body fat and the other one does. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the high end with very little body mass would be anorexia. That's like, morbidly skinny. And then a morbidly lean person with high function would be someone who is like an aerobic runner, not healthy, obsessed with running to the point that they are anorexic, or almost, right? So that's kind of my spectrum. And somewhere's in the middle, which is an undefined, uncharted, where you can't even actually put a sticker on it, because it's actually around average or just a bit above average. But I think it has way more to do with the context of how you live your life well, right? So when you look at this, and this is where I'd love to know from yours, because I have my own perception, and this is where you say it's relative. And I love that, because culture, right? Some cultures don't want you to be lean. As you just said, like, in the Caribbean culture, I know in some other cultures, where if with a female, if they're a little bit rounder, it's like, yeah, it's good, it's healthy. Oh, you're too lean, you need to eat more. And, for our culture here, it's like, oh, it's leanness. It's getting closer to lean and muscle. Like, I mean, it's a little bit more of the athletic build, but still excessively lean for realistic lifestyles is what's more sought after here. But I'm curious from your perspective, because I have my own perception, my own goals where I'm going to. What kind of goals or what kind of perception do you encourage your clients to look after in that realm of what is healthy?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I would say I do a lot of visualizations with my clients. And so, again, up to them, what does the healthiest version of you do? Take part of? What do they look like? And a part of this is for them to be honest about if there is a specific body size they're trying to achieve, why, and digging deeper into that. But my main point of these visualizations is, what actions does the healthiest you take, and how can we get that as a realistic thing you're doing. How can we promote that? How can we add that in? And that's how I kind of help them define what their healthy is. I think many business owners and trainers out there are like, this is like, once you reach this weight, or once you are exercising this amount of times, or whatever it may be, then you've reached it. Whereas again, everyone is completely different. Their availability to work out 5 times a week may be different from somebody else, or whatever it may be. So I always try to make it as specific to the person and their circumstance as possible. And I leave it up to them. What does the healthiest version of you do? Walk daily? Awesome. How do we get started?
Right. Yeah. And I think I love that. Again, making it relative to the person, super important. And I think it's a super practical mindset tactic. It's like, be very clear on who you're trying to be. Don't just have a kind of an idea. And I remember working with Gavin, he gave you that pie in the sky, and it's like, that made me a lot more fired up. I was super fired up when I actually visualized that, because that's a sweet life. And then it's problem solving. Well, what do we have to work on to start getting there? So, I mean, just to come back on kind of my whole discussion there on health, what are some definitions that you think should be kind of clarified for people? Because that was my interpretation. I want to hear yours, because, my goal is different than yours. My culture is different than yours. What do you think should really inherently define someone's health a little bit more clear for them?
I would honestly say it's hard to use those objective measures. Again, if we are looking at blood work, urine samples, and things like that, if we're going that route, those numbers will be different across cultures. So I can't say that those would be 100% the way to say that one is healthy. I would say the best way to measure health is quality of life, honestly, is one's quality of life. Again, that looks different for every person, but that takes into account all dimensions of wellness. So your job, your work-life balance, your stress levels, your mental health, your physical health. If you are at a quality of life that you are happy with, I feel like that is the best way to define health.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I've actually always said that I don't care how long it lasts in life. I just care how things last in life, like how good the quality of life is. I watched my uncle Walter and my uncle Bud, so they're brothers, and they both passed 10 years apart. So the one passed when he was like 84 or 85, and the other one was like 90 or 91, a little bit older. Well, the one who lasted longer did not have quality of life for the last 10 years. The other one who died younger was literally working on the farm that year, and he passed very peacefully. And so I'm like, yeah, give me that one. Give me that one where I'm like helping, grandkids and everything. And then that's it. That's kind of normal. That's good. But, it's the quality of life that matters. And the other thing too, as you had said, like all these tests are still just kind of predicting, like in those tests and stuff, that person still could have had terrible blood work and made it to 90 for some reason. People make it to 80 or 90 somehow being a smoker. So we don't always know these predictions, but the quality of life is important. And, I guess for myself is like, I think I try to encourage people to seek it, like to find that, right? Because the ideal body weight or fitness or health or anything, I don't think it exists. I think it's a choice of how you live your life, right? So like, I certainly have certain physical goals I want to get, right? Objective measures for milestones, right? I want to get to a certain body fat percentage because that's where my values are and that's where I'm going towards. But I straight up have told people who are like, feel bad about their body weight, and it's like, I'm like, you actually have nothing to worry about. And it was like guys on my hockey team, I looked around at all of them. It was like, there's no one in here that is in a unhealthy state after playing that hockey game. All of you are physically able to take care of yourself, and all you are enjoying a couple beers after work. What's the harm here? It looks like you guys are all pretty happy with this, right? If anything, I got more stressed because I only get to have one beer. They had to have several. And so, like, I mean, this is such an important topic, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about it. I'm curious from yourself because, like, as I'd mentioned, I do have objective goals because I think that's an important part of the character, right? Like, have an objective goal. You've never done a full or have 5K, or maybe you've never done, I know you're getting into powerlifting, like having objective goals. And mine is to have a certain leanness because it's always been embedded in me to accomplish that and to sustain it, not forever, because I know sustaining lean body types will not be the happiness forever, but to understand it better. And that's just a goal for me. And it's not forever, but to always be chasing something like that. And so that's where my healthy mindset is, as long as I'm chasing. So I'm curious from your perspective for yourself, what is something that you're chasing and how do you chase your own health in your own way?
Yeah, I love that. I actually, with moving into intuitive eating, I switched how I chase because it was a number on the scale for most of my life. And just recently, it's been more performance based. And I find that I'm way more motivated. There's no room for disappointment in that type of goal. So for me right now, powerlifting, I would like to do my first powerlifting competition in 2022, and I'm super excited about it. I've been training like crazy and hitting my PRs, and I'm super proud of myself for stepping into something completely new. I never powerlifted before in my life, but I found a passion with it. And I also would love to run a 5K. This has been a goal of mine for a while. Running has always been a struggle for me. I didn't mention this in my growing up story, but I was actually part of a cross country team when I was very young, and I knew I wanted to run. Like I was just always intrigued by it. I finished my first meet and could not catch my breath hours later, diagnosed with asthma. And so my parents took me out of every single sport there was. And I think that was kind of a part of the beginning of me not feeling my healthiest, having body image issues and all that not so fun stuff. But I've always had a goal of being a runner. And so I decided to start in 2020, whenever COVID started, whatever year that was. And I got significantly better, but it was a struggle. So this year, I'm dedicating more to getting that distance for myself. That's my downfall is duration with running. So that's another goal I'm working towards right now. So two very different goals, but they're big ones.
No, they're huge, and I love that you're doing very similar to myself. Is like, okay, the thing that I haven't done, right? And it's this curiosity, intrigue that is going to make you want to do it. And if there's anything that I believe that we can both agree on in health, is you need a physical pursuit. Like I don't think anyone can really inherently argue that. Like I can't imagine an argument for it. And so if you have a physical pursuit, whether it's performance, there's not a single client that I don't recommend you try to get stronger at something, right? Like, I don't care if it's push-ups, chin-ups, having your big three, and it's going to make you show up way better. My friend who has been on the podcast, Ray Lavoie, has been researching what makes people get better into flow state, this cognitive state of being really engrossed in something. And the major thing that they were utilizing to control this with tests was curiosity. Make people curious about things. And like when you're going in to go do powerlifting, well, I'm curious how I'm going to feel here. I'm curious about this. Now, it works against you for the running because you're like, oh man, I'm not curious what mile 3 feels like. That's I can say that. And me and my old boss, AJ, had said the same thing. Almost everyone should benefit from doing a long distance running event. And me and him have both done a marathon, and it like completely tests you as a character. And there is a different character trait within individuals who do long distance running, because you have to persevere, just this constant stress for the whole time. But, that's why I said it was such a good mental exercise for people. So I love that you're going after that and using intuitive eating. Now, when you look at health, and this is probably a difficult question, but I just want to hear a very open answer. Do you see any of your health in relation to your body composition, or are you content with it? Do you have any angles that you play with that? Because that's where it does get nuanced, right? Where some people have body composition. I want less fat or more fat, or like I'm more comfortable at a certain fat. I want more muscle. I want to be more defined. Like, And that's where it gets to be a hard discussion with people in the HAES movement. So I'm curious for yourself how you approach that topic, even with yourself, but definitely with clients as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the Health at Every Size book, they actually talk about Setpoint, which is essentially the place that your adult body tends to sit at once you're doing more of a routine when it comes to balance and food and exercise. So I would say I have a specific weight that I feel the most balanced at. I would say just in the mental side of it, just feeling comfortable in my body, but also where I've seen big strides when it came to performance as well. And it's the set point I kind of had for myself. This is also the place where I had the hugest plateau in my life. It's not the smallest body I was in. I think that's important to note, is that almost in my head, what I see as a set point was not the smallest body I was in, but where I felt most comfortable, most confident. And so when it comes to having this conversation with clients, I kind of go on more that visualization route again, and ask them, what does the healthiest you look like? Now, if they're coming up with, I want to look like a supermodel, we're going to talk a little bit deeper as to why, and find an honest place where we want to be and where we feel healthy. Because, I mean, supermodel diets, that's a whole topic in itself. It's not necessarily healthy. So I hope that answered your question.
No, it absolutely did, because it goes back to that diet culture problem, right? The way you kind of tied that in there, I thought that was really good. And even for yourself, I love that we came across the set point, because the set point theory is very important. And I do think that this is physiological and sociological. I think it is both how you're treating your body to get to a certain point and how long you're used to staying there. And that's kind of what I'm trying to, reprogram on myself fundamentally, because the set point theory, I think, is more psychological than we actually recognize, but it's more psychological if you use inappropriate tools. You know what I mean? Like, that's the crash dieting. If you're going to use a diet that you have no intention of sustaining when you get to a certain physique, then you're not going to sustain it. It just makes sense, right? I always say if you're going to borrow a lifestyle, you borrow the physique as a result. You're not going to keep it, right? Now, the other major thing too, and you kind of spoke about it, it's a comfort. So let's say you do get leaner. Well, what naturally happens, let's say you get leaner, you actually didn't even hate your diet, and I've been there many times, but there's a comfort here. Well, I can eat a little bit more. I got some comfort here. And so naturally we almost started eating a little bit more because we thought we had more wiggle room. We actually go back to this old character because we really didn't like that diet as much as we thought. Yeah. And so I think a big part of the set point theory is the way we view ourselves and the way we view our environment. And I mean, when it comes down to getting to a lean body weight, it has to be like, I think there's a million ways up the same hill, right? Some people can go fast and then somehow reverse diet out of it. Some people, just naturally get lean very quickly. Hate those people. And then, some people have to go super slow. And I think I'm that person. And for the most part too, as long as we come back to this, again, this identity of health, as long as you come back to this, is like you have a physical pursuit and you're showing up for it and you don't feel like food's owning your life. You don't feel like these things are negative on your life. You're not getting into emotional eating excessively. I still do, but not as much. And, you're able to enjoy life, right? Then who's to say that's not healthy? I don't care about blood markers myself either. I mean, I am going for a lean physique. I'm not worried about that. But I really like this discussion because I think it takes into context of, like I say, just giving people another voice on this. One of the things I actually wanted to mention too, I know I'd mentioned in one of our group chats with Mavericks, was like how important voices like yours are, because when you look at, and actually I would love to hear this, how hard is it when you come from a heavy body weight to actually think you can do it, because the voices in the diet culture are so far into the end extreme, the no pain, no gain. You got to look lean. Skinny doesn't feel as good as food tastes. It's like, whoa, those are dangerous words.
Yeah.
Skinny feels better. Like,
Yes, I could talk about this on both the being a coach aspect and personally. So personally, it it's almost a losing battle for myself because, um, I mean, I was always the chubby kid in my family. I got those genes from my mom and my I would say my mom's side of the family, and so losing weight and coming into a smaller body and then getting all the praise. Oh, there's my dog. Getting all the praise from people around me and people saying like, oh, like how much further are you going? It's almost like there is no end point for me. I was like, okay, I will just be dieting forever until I look like, I don't even know, a culture that I'm not even from. So it was quite difficult, and so I had to lean into myself and go into that visualization stage and be honest with what I wanted and what my version of me looked like, especially with the media showing this is what a healthy body looks like, and it doesn't look anything like mine. I had to determine to myself, okay, this is what a healthy lifestyle feels like to me. This is what balance feels like to me. This is where I feel good in my clothes. So this is where I stop.
yeah, super value. First off, Jazzy is looking so adorable. Her puppy's coming on the screen here to get attention and get pet. So she just looks adorable. I love it. So yeah, and that's the important part of this conversation, right? Like, I think everyone just needs an ambition relative to them, and like, I mean, I can't imagine going through that battle at the start, because at the start there is not, like, the loudest voices are inherently the people who just haven't had that battle, or they went through an extreme battle, and not a lot of people make that successful, right? Like, I think it's I've heard high percentage of people can lose the weight, but 9 out of 10 people don't sustain it and they don't keep it off. Now that's a huge like losing battle, like you say. That's completely uphill. But for people to hear this voice and this idea, it's just so important, right? Because it's just going to make it like seem more reasonable. Like when you see someone very lean, oh, you got your stuff together, all this stuff. How do you listen to that, right? Because you don't know what this is like over here. And for individuals like yourself, where you're saying, okay, I've been there, and you don't have to necessarily go to that far end. There's other paths. And I think that's super valuable. So what are some other real important things you think, especially people who have body image issues are thinking about making the transition? Because I always try to explain to people, it's not a 180 on the road. If you're driving on a road and you do a 180, you will flip your fucking car. No doubt. And so if you were to, maybe, I always say, turn your steering wheel column 4 degrees to the left, it's a slight lean, you actually go 180 within a year without even knowing it. And that's what I try to preach, but it doesn't seem significant. So that's my one tidbit. But what are other tidbits like that you think people should know, especially if they have body image issues, they want to understand more the HAES kind of movement? What do you think people should know about this?
Yeah, I like what you said there, and I preach that a lot. Is that the short-term road is not going to get you to a lifetime of change, and that's generally what people are looking for. I know many people hop onto different diets for weddings or trips, but ideally they're wanting to keep it up. So why not take the proper road, the slower road? And like you said, there is a way to get to your idea of a version of healthy in the long run without even realizing you're there, because you made those realistic habits. So I'd like to hop on that for the first tidbit is take it slow. It's way more rewarding when you're not completely changing your lifestyle, when you're finding new fun recipes that you get to add in, when you're finding enjoyment in exercise and finding what you love, and you're, fueling your own motivation because you found what you love, rather than trying to stick with something you don't like to get to a goal and then hit that goal and not want to continue and falling back into that cycle. Another important piece is that from my own coaching aspect, I like to promote goals that aren't a goal weight specifically. I like to promote the healthy habits. So what habits do you want to add in to feel your best? Is it having more veggies? Is it a little less McDonald's? What do we have to change to get you feeling good? Because a lot of the time that source of guilt that comes up with food is because mentally you knew you didn't want it, but there was a part of you that did, and you kind of lost that battle within yourself. So how do we get rid of that guilt? Through healthy habits. One more thing I'd like to add, I'd say, as for tidbits, is, well, in the HAES movement, one of their principles, they call it respectful care, but just acknowledging that your version of health is completely different from the next person. You have to take into account your own culture, but also your own personal preferences, your own personal dislikes, and don't fall into the trap of, my favorite influencer does this, so I'm going to follow everything they do. You have to make it your own for it to work. So those are my tidbits there.
Beautifully stated there. I love that tidbit at the end, and it is super important to define, because we end up defining ourselves by influencers. I don't even love that term, but it is what it is. It's like our culture is influencing us to our opinions.
Yeah.
And I've had people try to say that, my friends, because I post so much, and they're like, "Oh, you're an influencer now." I'm like, no. I'll say I'll call myself an educator. I'm a guy who does funny reels, but don't call me an influencer. No. But influencers are real. It is a real problem, and there can be inspiration there, but there's also, I think, just even you saying that, I didn't even set into me. I'm like, I probably even have that too much. I think we all do. Like, we all get manipulated by culture. I always tell people, when you look in the mirror, you're actually not looking at self-reflection. You're looking at personal reflection. The reflection in the mirror is something completely objective that people would see differently than you. You're seeing your assumption based on cultural norms and your interpretation of what you see. Therefore, you're not even seeing the mirror. You're just seeing what you think you see. And that's what makes it so dangerous. And so I think it's super valuable that you give someone a opportunity to write their own story, write your own, goal point. And I really love, like, I'm not saying that I don't use these tools. I use calorie tracking, weight, and all those things, but using the actual goal to be the action, because the process is the result. It's a quote I got from my boxing coach, Ryan Savage. The process is the result. Like, what you are physically doing is what we want to get out of you, and always try to improve it in some way, right? And I think that's a really beautiful sentiment. So, really terrific. I think this has been a great topic, and I think a lot of people can be helped by this, because especially people who are starting out, it's a terrifying thing. I cannot imagine it. I've been obsessed since, like I mentioned, those Taebo takes and 6-day abs. So I've been in exercise for a long time, but when you're just starting out, you need these messages. So what I'd love to know is more, you talked about your most recent ambition. I want a little bit more details there. So powerlifting, tell me, when's the hopeful meet? How are your numbers looking? And tell me a bit more about that.
Yes, so I am going to do a push-pull as my first meet. So I am skipping out on the squat simply because I am not feeling comfortable with my range of motion with it. I did have a back injury in the past, and I found that I still have to work through that in order to get as low as I need to qualify. And I don't want to go into the meet with my deadlift and bench press so ready to go, but my squat disqualifies me right at the beginning. So that is what we're looking at. So push pull. And hopefully this summer, there is one out in Ontario happening that I believe is in driving distance. So I am going to try my best to get into that if I can. And if not, well, I'm getting into what I can for 2022, sorry. So hopefully this summer.
Yeah, got to get used to using that number. It felt like 2020 never ended, right? So
Yeah.
but no, that's wonderful. I'm super excited for you. I'm hoping I'm going to do one in the next year or so here. I got a knee issue, but yeah, I think powerlifting's so rewarding. Like it's so simple, you know, it's just lift things up, put things down, and you know, you catch your breath in between pretty easily. So it like, again, it makes it a part of the process. So why don't you tell the viewers and listeners a bit more about where they can find your stuff? And yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm heavily on Instagram at kinactivity, Kin activity, all one word. And I also do have a Facebook group. If you message me on Instagram, I could link you to that. And in there, I'm giving out just healthy recipes, little tidbits, little mindset shifts when it comes to healthy living. And right now, so Ryan kind of mentioned that my background is more in body positivity and lifestyle coaching and finding balance. I am taking these skills and infusing them into managing chronic illness. So that's my main focus right now. I do have a general lifestyle change 3-month program for anyone that is not living with a chronic illness at the moment or anything like that. But again, my focus right now is type 2 diabetes and finding balance. Again, using the same principles, finding, the roots of diet culture and where we can change things, how we can create a healthy lifestyle specifically for managing blood sugar. So it's a little bit more rigid in the nutrition side of things than just what do we like to eat, what do we don't like to eat. But that is another adventure I'm going on and bringing HAES with me. So I'm very excited for that. So you can find that on Connectivity as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I think this was a great conversation. I'm certainly going to have you on again, and I want to hear about all the powerlifting and stuff like that next time. Sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay. See you later, Shaq. Thank you so much to Shaq. I love that chat. It was a wonderful conversation. We got really what I wanted out of it, and we actually even talked a bit more off air because we were really on par with a lot of thoughts. And, you know, as I mentioned at the start, like we come from very different perspectives on how to work with clients. Our goals are inherently different. But that doesn't mean I don't agree with healthy at many sizes. And we actually did talk about something off air, and I should have brought it up on the show, and I meant to, but we did agree with this. And the premise of how HAES, healthy at any size or healthy at every size, can be actually kind of challenging and not healthy when people are not using their body, when they're not attempting to have a physical capacity. And that's inherently where she had come back to agreeing when we're looking at the health spectrum that we discussed, where there's morbidly obese and there's morbidly fit, and there is anorexic and there is anorexic and fit. But, you know, the thing there is like someone who's anorexic, even certain body types that might be like in some way people might think is somewhat okay. If you don't have a physical capacity, you're not healthy. And you can go too far into physical capacity itself, right? So the main point here is that we did agree that healthy can exist anywhere on the spectrum. I mean, it is your life. It is your quality of life, and it is your choice. I'm chasing things that align with my values currently. You know, we'll see what it's like. My current goal is to live around 10% or sub 10% body fat for as long as I can. And that might change. That very well might change because that's not going to be an easy feat. But I know anyone at a modest body fat percentage, and that is so subjective. As we mentioned, it depends on your lifestyle culture. It depends on you know, what you want out of your physique and stuff like that. But as long as you can have, and what the actual standard for physical capacity, that's subjective as well. And we don't really have that information as far as what that is. Because remember, health is really mainly measured by whether or not you're going to die sooner, which could even be wrong, right? So we really don't know. But we can say, and I do agree with this, that you can be happy at any size. And so if you can find that you're pushing your health and you're happy with it, then I think you're on the right path. And I think me and Shaq agree on that. And so I really hope that you share this podcast with anyone who has a hard time with body image. As I mentioned to Shaq, like Shaq came from that side. Shaq came from coming from so far and making her way into a body and a lifestyle that she loves. And I didn't have to come from very far. I was a chubbier kid. It was hard for me for a few years, but not that hard. Not to the extent where I thought it was completely out of reach, which most people do at that far end, or I imagine they do. And knowing that you don't have to climb all the way to what people perceive as the top, there's other places to live. And so I hope there's a really good story for everyone to appreciate there, and you can share this with someone. If you do have body image issues and you're wondering about more about improving your mindset around this stuff, I do recommend you go see Shaq, because I completely value so many of the things she said. She actually extremely impressed me with how she always had this, it depends on the client. That goes to show that she knows how to handle her clients, because there's no one size fits all. And that's what makes her approach so helpful and powerful for people for long term. So I really valued that. I think that was an awesome discussion. And I'm certainly going to have her on again down the road, hopefully find out about how her powerlifting meets are going. And I'm super proud for her for that and excited to hear how that goes. But thank you again for listening in, and remember to share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But never, ever forget, don't you dare forget, it is not about the pursuit of happiness. It is with the happiness within that pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.